Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Naeem, and I'm the Senior Digital Marketing Executive here at ICOR. The topic of our webinar today will be value streams in modern IT service management. Before we get started today, I would like to mention the format and etiquette for this webinar. It will be a 45-minute session, give or take. Due to a large audience, there will be no Q&A and in-webinar chats. However, if you do have any questions, we will provide contact details at the end of the session so you can send them to us. So sit back, listen, and enjoy. Now, we will turn our attention to the main speakers for today. Both Chris and Adam are senior consultants and are part of the ICOR leadership team. Chris has worked in IT and service management for the last 20 years. He has held senior positions at major blue chip companies and is a keen enthusiast for new technologies and ways of working. Adam has worked in the organization for the past 12 years. He has strong background in operational service delivery and has undertaken a number of transition and transformation programs, delivering new technology and modern ways of working in various organization and industry sectors. So I just wanted to give everyone an introduction of ICOR. We have 26 years of experience in helping organizations embed modern effective approaches to IT service management and service integration and management good practices. We also have extensive experience in developing modern IT service management approaches to help our clients evolve to meet the challenges of a digital agile world. Now that you've understood a bit more about us, I will now be handing over to Chris to get us underway today.
Yeah, thanks, Naeem. Can I firstly say thank you to everybody for taking your time out of your busy schedules just to come and listen to us. This is obviously the latest in a series of webinars that we hold across the year. We've done previous ones around things like SIAM, modern operating models, modern service management practices. But we thought with this one, we'd take a little bit more of a deeper dive around some of the key topics that we're hearing about from our clients, and particularly around value chains and value streams. So what we're going to talk about today is what they really are. So both are something that ITIL4 have been a big supporter of, and we've seen a lot of noise around that and a lot of challenges around that from our clients perspectively. But essentially, this is something that's been around for quite a long time now. So this whole thing about trying to drive effective use of products and making sure we're getting the maximum value out of them isn't something new, but I think it's important that we look at it from an ITIL4 focus perspective and understand what challenges that's bringing. We'll also talk about the different perspectives from an organization perspective and how they actually are important in driving and maximizing the value that you bring to your end customers. And therefore, how the heart, it's important that you put the business at the heart of everything that you do, basically. We will also cover some of the basics around value chains and value streams, just to make sure we're all talking about the same concepts, and then talk about how you're going to get the most out of those and give you some experience that we've had from working with some of our clients. And then lastly, we'll talk around some of the things that you need to think about and some of the considerations you need to really make sure you understand when you're kind of grappling with this overall subject. So moving on, let's just quickly talk about why are value streams and value chain really important. So let's have a look at the top left-hand side, and you kind of got the usual business and server provider dynamic here. We've got the guy in the business in the top left-hand corner, thinking about actually how we need to change our business, that it needs to be more responsive to its customers and market needs. So we need to think about, the value that we're bringing to the customer, how we therefore change to be more responsive and adaptable to kind of the changing business needs, and thinking about how we involve IT from that perspective to make sure that we're more innovative and help us achieve and drive those objectives. But at the same time, you kind of got the IT service provider who really is focused around making sure that we're providing high-class services as far as we're concerned. That's things about high availability. It's about making sure we have low incidents and low instances of failed changes, and basically we're not disrupting the business. Ultimately, I mean, they're both very good views of the world. But the question I think we need to ask ourselves from an IT perspective is, are we truly supporting the business? And how can we be more responsive and effective? So do we need to have a look at things about how we increase our overall efficiency? Do we need to have think about actually how we improve our overall quality? Or ultimately, do we worry about how we reduce our cost to be more streamlined, because then we can pass those savings back on to the end customers? The reality is ultimately that you need to have a close look at the way we deliver services if we're going to do that. And that is where value chains and value streams come in, and mapping those out becomes really important at what we do. It's about ensuring we understand the overall business objectives and what the business is delivering, and how we're going to support that in our end-to-end delivery ecosystem. But I think the strapline and baseline basically is about any value stream mapping. It's about making sure that you understand the key business objectives, the services and products that you're delivering, and more importantly, or just as importantly, who your customers are and how you're going to satisfy them, whether those customers be both internal and external. So let's just build upon that a little further. And as I said at the beginning, I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing and everyone's on the same page from a value chain and value stream perspective. So I think the first thing to say is that value chains and streams is not a new concept. It's really something that's been around for some time. And there are a number of definitions out there that basically all equate to the same thing. And I think the two examples on this slide really cover that. So we kind of got the lean IT view, which really explains that value streams are the vehicle that deliver value to our customers, and that the value stream consists of steps that add value to that unit of work that we're constantly delivering. And lean really gives you some guidance and techniques to continue to improve those steps. And that those of you who have been around in things like Six Sigma for some time, etc., you know, a lot of those concepts will be very familiar to you. If we then move into IT for IT, that really identifies several value streams and supporting activities. And the value streams it identifies are really important in the way that you deliver a modern IT service, as it provides that framework for the business of managing IT, and particularly useful when you're shifting the focus to digital products and making sure that it provides guidance around the operating model support, that we have the right focus there. So if we look at the kind of the typical IT for IT value streams, there are things like strategy to portfolio, requirement to deploy, request to fulfill, detect to correct, which I think you'll also be familiar with from an ITIL 4 perspective. But it's important to understand that there are different views and flavors about that. And, you know, if we then talk about ITIL 4, then ITIL 4 really is focused heavily about delivering value, but it really doesn't quantify what it means by value, or really talks about what's important. And that's because actually what's important to one organization may be completely different to another. So from one perspective, you may be totally focused around providing great customer experience, while someone else may be focused around operational stability, and even a third then around speed to market. And it doesn't really matter, though, actually what the overall primary focus is. What is true across all of those is that the interaction with users, customers, and stakeholders is needed to make sure that we're providing the value that we should be doing to the market. And that actually rather than working in isolation, which is what we've always done previously, we need to be working across the organization, and particularly across the whole of IT. And so ITIL4 really emphasizes that by thinking about and talking about the idea of co-creation. And co-creation really is that shift away from not just focusing on one area to focus on more areas, but actually also about focus away from what is being delivered to actually the how. And the how really takes that holistic view of the service delivery organization and thinks about not just the processes, but also things like the people, the partners, and the technology that are used in actually delivery terms, and thinks about any external factors that might constrain or even influence that service provision. So, and a lot of you may recognize that as the 4Ps, the people, process, partners, products that we all have been managing with for quite some time in ITIL 3 terms. So ITIL 4 takes that a step further and then starts to think about the 4 dimensions of service management. And basically, it's like I say, it builds upon the previous ITIL 3 versions, and it's a holistic approach really that makes sure that we really think about all those individual elements when we're looking at and streamlining our overall processes. And the key thing there about value co-creation really is not necessarily achieved via a single practice. So obviously, in ITIL 3 terms, we've moved away from processes to practices in ITIL 4. And there's going to be many interconnected activities touching on multiple practice areas. And IT4 basically introduces us to the idea of a value stream as a series of steps that deliver value in a particular context. And then value streams point to the importance of breaking down those silos, as I already talked about, and making sure that we work flexibly and cooperatively to deliver more value. Now, Adam will talk about a lot more about that in detail over the next few slides, but I just want to make sure that that's pretty clear. So, irrespective of the frameworks that are available to us, it's important to think about the value and where to look when identifying the value streams, but actually understanding our customers and constitutes value is the most important thing. And accepting that that can change over time and vary according to what deliver. But it's an important to have an approach that we continually appraises that, so we can make sure that we're always asking the relevant questions in our own organization and about our own service delivery capability. Let's make sure we continue to challenge ourselves and refine and optimize as possible. So I just wanted to bring one more slide before we get into a bit more detail about it. And this is a fairly standard slide, which I'm sure you'll have all seen from various literature from Axelos around ITIL 4, and particularly focus around value chains and value streams. It outlines the overall value chain concept, which kind of starts with demand on the left-hand side and ends with some value on the right-hand side. What's important to note, however, this is a high-level theory of a value chain, right? And it gives a framework to start your map value streams within this generic value chain. And all of you will need to think about actually what value chains that you've got, and just as importantly, actually where the streams fit within that. But if we focus on the actual value stream element, which is pretty much the element that's in the grey hexagon in the middle there, there are kind of there are 6 core activities in that really. There's the kind of the plan and improve, which is the top and the bottom elements. You've got engage on the left-hand side, and then you kind of got the design and transition, the obtain and build, and deliver and support elements in the middle box. And then obviously, as we've already talked about, you've got then a set of products and services that help you deliver that, and ultimately all of that ends in value being provided. If we just focus on the 6 activities within the ITIL 4 service value chain, then you've kind of got the plan stage. So the plan is really about making sure there's a shared understanding of what your organization needs to achieve, and just as importantly, the how. The engagement piece on the left-hand side is about actually making sure that you're engaging with your stakeholders and you have a good understanding of their needs, so that you can make sure that those are being met as you drove through this whole stream approach. In the design and transition piece, it's more about being responsible for the creation of new and changed services that kind of meet those stakeholder expectations we just talked about, either that be from a quality, cost, time to market, whatever perspective you want to bring to that. Once you kind of got that, then move into the obtain and build, which is about defining those service components and creating them and making sure that they're available when they're required, and that any specifications and requirements that you've got from your stakeholders are being met. And then lastly, it's kind of the deliver and support element. So ensuring that your services are being delivered and supported to those expectations and those specifications, and that we can monitor and improve upon them. And that last piece around improve really is something that we all recognize as continuous service improvement, but it's much more about making sure that we're continually improving and focusing and driving further optimization through the products, services, and practices that we're delivering. And I think it's important that you keep this in mind as we build on this. And what I'm now going to do is hand over to Adam, who's going to take you to a lot more deeper in the streams and give you some examples of value streams and some of the approaches that you need to take. Over to you, Adam. If you're talking, Adam, we can't hear you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Is that okay?
Yes, that's working. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Okay, so thanks, Chris, for that context and background. What I wanted to do now is kind of build on a practical example. So one you've probably seen in your organization. So this is around a new joiner, and it's a kind of useful example of a value stream because it's one where, you know, the IT service providers' processes and tools are really, you know, fundamental to success. And it's really, you know, it's a good example as well because, you know, there's a lot of interaction with the customer in this process or the business user of IT, and that really becomes clear. And really, our typical ITSM processes or ITIL4 practices, as we've talked about, start to overlap really with the business process. There's a number of activities. Obviously, the trigger here would be the demand. So, you know, an HR process, recruiting a new employee into the organization. And that really is going to, you know, that employee is going to need some access to IT resources. So really, the initial value chain activity of engage that Chris talked about is completed really when the, you know, the user's line manager completes a JML form. So that is going to trigger a request to be registered in our service management tool, and we move on to delivery and support. So that request might consist typically of several tasks, you know, assigned to different support teams in our organization. So, you know, maybe to hardware and infrastructure support teams and also application provisioning teams. So then during the sort of obtain and build phase, you know, the laptop is built for that user, application access is typically provided, you know, that's specific to their line of business or the role that they're going to be doing. You know, we might also issue them with some other kit, maybe smartphone, you know, other audio equipment for remote working, for instance. So following that, really, you know, once we've issued some kit, you know, that's really the product or the output of our service that's being, you know, delivered to the new user. And ultimately, you know, the customer there is getting value by, you know, joining the organization, being ready to start their job on day one, you know, really starting to be productive. So underneath that, there are, you know, a number of tools that sort of support that journey, if you like. So, you know, if we look at those supporting tools, we might have an online portal, so fairly typical. That's where we're going to register the request, and that supports that initial engage step. And then, you know, we also might have built some integration, you know, with our service management tool, registering the request, assigning tasks to different provisioning teams, and so on. And then when we obviously go on to build the device, you know, there's some other tools there that we might use. So deployment tools, imaging tools, you know, for the device that we're going to give the user. And then, you know, hopefully there's some integrations built for our CMDB. So when the device is ready to be added to the network, you know, we've got those CI relationships, etc. You know, in our configuration management database. But then, you know, building up the layer underneath that, we've got you know, the service management processes or practices. And there's a number of practice areas that kind of support this overall stream. You know, we've got the service catalog management, for instance. So, you know, that's really ensuring that all our, you know, business facing services and product offerings are available for the customer to choose from. And that's really, you know, give them an accurate and up-to-date view, and that supports effective request management, obviously. And then request management really is the process that, or the practice that's going to handle that request as efficiently as possible, you know, and looking to reduce wait times, you know, cut out non-value add tasks throughout that process. So again, you know, looking at the overall value stream, you know, how we can sort of improve efficiencies. Then onto sort of IT asset management. So there, we're looking for a practice which, clearly we need visibility of all the hardware and software assets in the environment, and and then allocating those assets to users, the licensing implications and so on. And then some CMDB updates are made through the service configuration management practice. And then at the end of that chain, obviously when we provide that outcome or the value to the customer, to the new starter, then we're going to be gathering some customer feedback, hopefully at the end of that journey, but also sort of throughout that journey. And there's some ways we obviously can look to optimize, in line with that feedback. For instance, in the JML forms, we might sort of refine the online forms to target the information we need and make us more effective at gathering it. Improving the coverage of the service catalog, so it's got more of our products and services in there over time. And then into request management, obviously introducing some automations, decreasing the wait times, reducing sort of manual intervention as our process handoffs typically take place. And then in terms of asset management, obviously, when we're allocating and reallocating licenses, we want to do that in a cost-efficient manner. Reallocate licenses, take advantage of our whatever enterprise agreements we might have in place, and make sure that we've got efficient use of licensing. Then in terms of configuration management, we might have some discovery tools in place where we can sort of detect devices on our network, understand the the relationships between them and so on and so forth. But really sort of what next? So really optimization is then really about, really analyzing those touch points, in the processes, assessing the tool capabilities that underpin that, and really automating those process steps, or, building the integrations that can support that flow of information. And then, as Chris mentioned before, encouraging this move away from the siloed view of the processes or practices in the organization, and kind of recognizing them as part of a value stream with some inputs and outputs. And I think then really, we sort of get on to thinking that the owners of those processes or practices can see their contribution to the overall value stream and look for some improvements, of course, but also, looking for those improvements with the from the perspective that it's going to benefit the customer, better lead times, improve visibility throughout the process, for instance. And I think, in this example, there's a couple of different customers. So, the individual, registering a request for the equipment in the first place, as well as the, the new joiner at the end of the chain, really receiving that value and being ready to start, their new role with their kits. So, there's different sort of customers there, or different users really that, to interact with. And engagement, therefore, happens at those different steps. We re-engage really at the end of the chain. So, this isn't just about, the stream finishes when we provide some value or an outcome. It's actually, re-engaging and sort of gathering, some feedback as well. How could we ever improve the process? And there's different ways we can do that. I mean, typically in your organizations, you might do sort of surveys to gather some feedback, but, maybe think about, is that interactive or personal enough? How can we maybe set up some collaboration forums to get that customer feedback, customer communities, understanding our different segments of, users out there within the business and their requirements, and maybe bringing those together, into sort of, those sort of customer communities and talking regularly to them. So really, this is as much about, how we engage with the customer and how we elevate the value streams, considering that co-creation of value. And that's really an important theme in ITIL 4. There's plenty of other value stream examples. So detect to correct would be a good example, which is, I think, as we mentioned before, something IT for IT talks about. And really, therefore, you'd be drilling down into the incident management processes, problem management, looking at your looking at your tools to sort of monitor, the network, etc., monitor the environment to trigger events and incidents, and then, take that through sort of restoration of service, and then through to sort of analyzing root cause through problem management. So, clearly a good example really of a value stream with different stakeholders there, and sort of, different requirements throughout that. And then, building a new product or service is another really good example. So, requirements gathering, design, build through to implementation of the new service. And that's really another area to look out for, creating some value stream maps. And then looking at the optimizations, again, we mentioned the 4 Ps, but, ITIL 4 talks about 4 dimensions. And really that is a lens at which to look at it or scrutinize each one of these activities. So, looking at the information technology, looking at that tool integration, but also starting to look at, partners and suppliers. We might have, vendors that are important in request fulfillment, for instance. We might need to go out to an external party. So do they understand the overall value stream and their role within it? And also, vendors and partners can help us, in mapping out these value streams. And we'd obviously over time look for partners that are strategically aligned and kind of support this concept of value sort of co-creation and looking for opportunities to sort of streamline and improve. And then obviously we've got the organizations and people elements and obviously processes and value as part of that as well. So really the key point is, when considering value streams to map, I think, use some processes initially where there's some, direct customer interaction, because that's really going to help. So we move on now to think about some of the techniques to understand the customer journey and just, maybe extending this example a little bit further. We can start to, think about some techniques like developing user stories, developed around a particular customer persona or a number of customer personas. What else might the customer want from our onboarding process, and what else is driving value, and have really understood the journey from start to finish. So, we've given the basic example. So, a typical statement is: a new starter, I want to know that my IT kit and accounts will be ready for me on arrival to, therefore be productive from day one. And that, it's underpinned by our join us, move and leave us process and supporting service management processes. And that's really a basic ask of the service provider, and one we can satisfy by looking at that value stream, reducing the manual effort, introducing automation, making sure that kind of, runs smoothly, and, ultimately ensuring that new user is up and running really in a timely manner. But in addition to that, really, resource and process and resource efficiency is also of direct value to a service provider. And then it starts to emerge, of course, that, the same optimizations within the value stream can drive value from a different stakeholder perspectives. So ultimately, that improvement from a service delivery manager or service provider, process and resource efficiency improvements are going to reduce the cost for the service provider as well. But if we think maybe about an additional customer proposition really in this journey, which might be triggered by looking at the value stream, is maybe the customer wants to know where to go for training, in the use of other IT products and tools. So not directly what we've given them access to, but what else is available to them, where they can get exposure, or where they can get some training, or access to learning resources. And that's really a common one, I think, today, because modern platforms and products offer users greater autonomy. They provide features and functionality which are actually enabling the business to become more efficient, less manual, therefore kind of increasing overall productivity. So really, the customer may need our assistance here as a service provider. And again, that's an important part of the customer journey. So, providing access to training and learning resources around the platforms we can provide to the customer, that becomes really important. I think that's also a good example of, the IT becoming a facilitator, as customers and users embrace digital and modern platforms. And that's somewhere where we can really sort of start to add value to the customer experience. So really, a concept that's growing, like in today's organizations, is like, citizen development. So, in your own organizations, you might have platforms now which, actually users can start to configure, or even, take advantage of no and low code development, to build solutions, that automate business processes themselves. And that's really, a good example, because really the service provider is providing tools and capability to the business, but not having to do everything. But obviously, as a service provider, we need to think about the appropriate governance, the security controls around that. But that's a really beneficial offering, and something that we can start to understand by looking at value streams. And then also taking a look at collaboration. So alongside sort of productivity, that's another important theme in digital organizations. A customer might want to know who else in the organization has a similar role and how they might be able to get in touch. We might learn that through, feedback on our basic joiners process. And here, really, the service provider is being responsive to that feedback. We can introduce maybe users to Teams channels, collaboration forums where they can join user communities. They might be based around, the use of technology and tools to actually improve, and help with business process efficiency. So I think what we're kind of starting to see that, there's numerous sources of value through that very basic example. And I think importantly, the customer journey doesn't finish when we onboard them. We give them the laptop and say they're ready to start work. So we need to understand and expand on our understanding of the value stream, based around maybe looking at different personas, and understanding what might be important to that persona, through the different throughout the journeys. So just looking at some basic stakeholder perspectives maybe to take into consideration, from a customer's perspective, just to kind of summarize really, a customer might want easily accessible IT services, always available. They want timely and appropriate change. Overall, they want tools to help them increase their productivity, but obviously, wanting acceptable pricing as well. A service owner, from the perspective of, okay, efficient use of IT resources becomes important, but also having effective processes which support the business outcomes. So being in line and in tune with the customer requirements and the business outcomes is really to actually implement processes which are streamlined, efficient, which don't have any waste within them, and actually focus on the business outcome, not just process for process sake. And also looking at integrating the vendors and partners into these activities is of paramount importance to a service owner, typically faced with a number of different vendors within the organization, different providers of service, both internal and external. But again, the cost theme is going to be important here from a service owner's perspective. We need to sort of control the cost of service delivery and make sure we're making the most effective use of the funds that are available to us to deliver that service. From a CIO's perspective, they're going to be more focused on innovation, maybe offering new services, really be seen as that strategic partner to the business, but again, lowering total cost of ownership. And a process or practice owner, is looking really at developing a streamlined process, having clarity on inputs and outputs, process interfaces, who depends on the output that I'm providing and what outputs am I dependent on, that sort of conversation, and really having process interfaces that add value in the overall value stream. So really, the value stream mapping exercise is clearly about understanding those stakeholders, their drivers and objectives, and really, understanding the different personas is really, as a service delivery organization, it gives a better grounding to undertake the value stream mapping exercise. And, recognizing that there's some common themes throughout there in terms of the different stakeholder perspectives, but, they can also be very different, but, they're all important to sort of take into account when mapping out those value streams. So just to now sort of progress to talk about, what an approach might be to sort of optimize value streams and kind of where to start. I think, there's no one size fits all approach. Organizations are clearly going to have different starting points, but there's a logical sequence of activity, really, a sequence of events really in a value stream mapping exercise. So these are some things to maybe think about in your own organization about how you might go about this. So really, initially identify the strategic objectives, aligning with the customer, with the business priorities. And we've seen that there might be different perspectives. So, we might be in an organization which is looking to break into new markets, offer new products to the customers. So therefore, speed and innovation are going to be paramount importance. Similarly, an organization might have received some penalties for regulatory compliance issues. They might have some objectives to tighten the governances around processes and data. Or, a retail organization might be selling products online, doesn't want any downtime, particularly at certain times of the year. So, availability and operational stability are therefore the primary drivers of a value stream mapping exercise from that perspective. So all of those are valid, of course, and There's also going to be a wide coverage of value streams within any particular organization. It's a changing picture. It's not an exercise to be done initially and then we forget about it. It needs to be continually revisited with the customer and revisited with the different stakeholders. And really, ultimately IT needs to be seen, as an enabler to the business, ensuring that those communication channels are open really, and we're having that sort of continuous dialogue. There's different techniques to understand what's driving, the customer. So, Lean IT talks about voice of the customer, for instance, and that's a useful technique to adopt. Taking one of the examples above, the customer might indicate that, the delivery time of changes needs to be shorter to really support that speed and innovation as the primary source of value. So, timeliness and reliability are the key sources of value there. And they're important things as maybe, an IT service provider that we need to start measuring and sort of reporting against and really starting to improve around those activities. And then timeliness, availability of development capacity, for instance, understanding that, if we've got a development process that takes 10 weeks to deliver anything, then we're not really helping the business achieve that goal. And then, of course, we can look at reliability, and that depends on driving down the number of defects in that example, perhaps improving test coverage and quality overall. Next phase really would be to start, mapping out the value streams themselves. And I think the important things to note here that it's not just about mapping the ITSM process. The ITSM processes or practices support the value stream. They are not the value stream in themselves. So really, how are we engaging with the customer and what outcome they need to see. And that's not just an outcome of one of our processes or an output of one of our processes. And there's obviously going to be several processes or practice areas that contribute to that value. And that's important to map those interfaces and touch points in this step. So, and the customer is not to be viewed as just the ultimate customer we're providing the service to, but the internal customers within each value stream that we've identified, who are we passing this information to and from, and what are their requirements of the value stream. I think also, if you're in organizations where there's a service integrator, you might have employed a SIAM model, for instance. Value stream mapping is a technique that we can use to understand how the different vendors and partners contribute to that value. So, and also having them on board with a value stream mapping exercise is beneficial, understanding their role in the context in that end-to-end sort of chain of activities. And that's really, we might look to the service integrator to facilitate a value stream mapping activity or exercise. So taking a sort of agile theme, really, sort of minimum viable products, that's something that's talked about. It's talked about in product development. We can start to sort of adapt that into this environment, really. So minimum viable practice or process. That's the kind of approach we should take when refining processes that are involved in each value stream. Removing out the activities that aren't adding value, but also, remembering that there are different stakeholders. So, there might not be an immediate value seen to the end user of a service in a particular step, but actually, if we sort of analyze and monitor that activity, it's going to help us ultimately improve it and then, deliver, value at the end. So the stakeholders' perspectives are always important in this type of exercise. And then moving on finally to sort of optimize. Ultimately the objective of any value stream mapping exercise is to optimize it or improve it. And there's those different lenses we can use to look at that. The 4 dimensions of service management is a good framework there. Looking at the information and technology, the partners and suppliers we've talked about, organizations and people, and obviously value and processes. And I think looking at optimizations in that way ensures that, the service provider is considering each contributing element. And really that is with the objective of having a service improvement plan or a set of plans really that are focused and relevant on, value to the customer. If we've gone through that, if we've gone through, the process of mapping out these value streams and identifying what's important, then, we've got targeted service improvement plans really that we can sort of really stand by and get investment really, or, approval to spend money on those things, whether it be tool sort of improvements, or introducing new technology, or whether it's different types of resources, or standing up new teams, etc. I think it all kind of supports that business case really, if we can map out our value streams. And I think if you look at the operating model as a whole, I think ultimately that's part of an optimized step. So if we look at our overall operating model, reviewing that and adjusting it to ensure a greater focus on value streams, and even moving away from just having sort of practice or process owners in place. They might still have a siloed outlook. Should we introduce value stream owners, for instance, looking at that overall sort of operating model, and how that supports the focus on value. So, for instance, we could have a service transition value stream, an owner for that value stream, and there still might be some processes or practices within that, such as change enablement, release management, and so on. But really, we can have a value stream owner with some objectives around, how those sort of process areas really work together to ensure, well-managed change, and supported change is delivered to the business. So I'm going to hand back over to Chris now, who's going to sort of wrap it up a little bit with some conclusions from what we've talked about today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and I hope everyone has found that useful and got some food for thought about that. We are getting close towards the top of the hour, so sorry, the end of the session. So let me just quickly summarize some of the things that we just need to really need to think about. So value stream mapping is a really important activity, regardless of where you are in terms of the maturity of your organization. That can be whether it's kind of in a greenfield site, whether you're an established organization around ITIL 3 with very mature processes, or whether it's about organization looking at the kind of the MVP, as Adam's just talked about, so that it can prioritize investment and the focus. Regardless of where you are in that chain, it's about making sure that you streamline and optimize and maximize the value you're bringing to your end organizations. And you shouldn't lose sight of that. And you also shouldn't just think about this is all about ITIL 4, because it isn't. It's about the value that you bring and the ensuring that is being maximized. And you can do this regardless of whatever framework you've implemented. So it doesn't have to be ITIL 4. It can be any of those other frameworks we talked about earlier, or even something different. But just think about putting the customer and everything else at the heart of what you're trying to deliver, and then making sure that's streamlined and optimized as much as possible, using the 4 dimensions that we talked about earlier to make sure that you're considering all elements and you're really getting that kind of value co-creation view of the world. So as well as you need to make sure that you can map out the path and focus on the key touch points throughout the overall journey, so that you can make sure that the end-to-end perspective from a customer is enhanced, and that the experience to them is the value and maximized as much as possible. Only by doing all of that, kind of looking at the 4 dimensions, the organization, people, information technology, partners and suppliers, and all of that kind of value streams and process stuff, will you truly therefore make sure you enhance the customer journey and the value and experience they're going to get from that. And then finally, I think it's about the end result will ensure that any investment you make within your business supports the value that you're going to bring, and also enhance the overall return on investment that you're going to bring. So, just always think about the value stream optimization is about making sure that you're going to get that maximum investment to drive the maximum value. And that should be at the heart of everything that you think about. So just one last slide from me, and I promise it's the only sales slide you'll get today. And I'm only going to spend 1 minute on it, to be honest with you. So, what we got on the slide are a number of areas that we cover. So we talked a lot today about ITIL 4 and value chains, but actually, we do an awful lot more. So if you're struggling with anything around your end-to-end delivery chain, from initial design, roadmaps, supply, tool selection, through to just requiring additional support to help shape and run your BAU capabilities, then we can help. We've got products that map to everything that you can see on the screen here, and we can do one, or we could do all of that, starting at the top end on the left-hand side, defining operating models, through to making sure we embed it, and then helping you run it at the back end. So basically, if you need any help with any of the topics we talked about today, in terms of doing value chains and value stream mapping and that sort of stuff, or any of these other things on the screen, then please reach out and have a chat with us, and we'll try and see how we can help you. So again, thank you for taking the time out, and I'll just hand back to Naeem just to close it out.
Thanks, Chris. If you guys do have any questions, we will be happy to answer them. Please use the contact details mentioned within this slide. And once again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.